Okay, Monopoly. A Monopoly in 15 minutes or less because I haven't got much space on my phone. 14 minutes and 51 seconds. Okay, there are three types of monopoly. Natural monopoly, when there's a single seller in the market, because there is no other competition, either the investment required is too high, so nobody else has the money to invest, or because they are the only ones with access to those resources. Then you have a statutory monopoly, one that is protected, created by the government, either because it's strategical, such as defense. The UK makes its own weapons and it's the buyer of its own weapons. Or you can have monopolistic power when you have a business owning 25% of the market or more. So for example, Tesco, Google, they'll be the ones that own a lot of market share. So they have monopolistic power, even though they're not the only ones in the market. So monopolies, they can exploit the consumer. Why? Because they're the only sellers in the market. So hence they have a downward sloping demand curve, like that. And when that meets the supply, we have an equilibrium point. Now, in a monopoly, they can decide to reduce the quantity. So instead of having the quantity at equilibrium, they will make less than they can, because they can make up to this quantity, but they'll do less, so that they can increase the prices. So that's because they're the only ones selling it. So you have nowhere else to go. So by reducing the quantity, they can increase those prices. And so hence they create welfare loss in the economy, or they carry welfare loss, to the community, to you and I, because we can't. They can produce those items, but they're not going to do it just to increase prices. So some people are going to go without having the items, even though they could be produced. Things with monopolies, we need to understand they also erode consumer surplus. When we look at consumer surplus, that is the difference between the price I am willing to pay and the price I am actually paying. So when we look at the equilibrium point, we see that, let's say a flight to Spain, each ticket is £50 and the amount of seats in the plane is 100. So that will be the equilibrium point in terms of supply and demand. Now, the difference is, if I really want a plane ticket, I'm willing to pay up to maybe £300 for that ticket. So a really high price, way above the actual equilibrium price. But because the price is at £50, I'm better off because I have the difference between £300 and £50. Instead of paying 300, I'm only paying 50. That's the market price. So all that benefit is your consumer surplus. So it's all this triangle up here. That is your consumer surplus. The difference between what you are paying and what you're willing to pay, that might be higher. So consumer surplus. Again, we're assuming a downward sloping curve. So we're assuming that people will pay more if the output was restricted or there was less available. So also, this gets eroded. How? Because again, they will reduce the quantity. So instead of selling 100 tickets, they might decide to sell only 50 tickets. So that'll be quantity one. And so hence, by doing that, then the new market price is not going to be £50 anymore, but it might be £100. P1 there. So you can see that all this consumer surplus, all this green area, it just gets erased, right? Not all that consumer surplus gets eroded away because people are going to have to pay a higher price than they were before. And now the consumer surplus is only a tiny little bit up here. I guess those desperate people that really need to go to Spain. Maybe their companies paying for those expensive tickets. They're the only ones who are kind of better off, I guess, because they're still willing to pay a lot more. Good. So that is consumer surplus, and that's also covering our welfare loss, which is the difference between what they can produce and what they're actually producing. So they're actually producing this quantity, and they could be producing this one. So we have all this triangle here is our welfare loss to society. That makes society unhappy because they're exploiting it. They could be producing it, but they're deciding not to, so they can increase prices. So welfare loss to society. Good. Next, hurry up. Next, we need to understand, or we need to look at a couple of things. Let's have a look. We need to look at efficiencies, productively efficient, allocatively efficient. So productively efficient is producing goods at the lowest cost of your average cost curve. Your average cost curve is the cost per unit, and the lowest point is the lowest cost per unit that you can produce at. And that is the point where it meets with the marginal cost per unit. So when the marginal cost equals the average cost, then you reach your lowest point of the average cost curve. Right. So your demand curve, also known as the average revenue, that's the price per unit, and so the quantities you will sell when the price goes down. So we also have our marginal cost. So marginal cost is the extra cost incurred every single time we make one more unit. And we know that first goes down, then it goes up, it goes down because we benefit from using our capital, so using our machinery. So we have machines, which is an initial cost, and then as we employ people, they can use those machines and produce. So hence we have a reduction in it, but then our marginal cost tends to increase because we start employing more people to produce more output, but then they become less productive because there's not enough capital for them to use. Now, this drives something called the average, so average cost curve. And this is the average. So it's not the margin anymore, but it's the average, depending on the output we're producing. So, but the margin drives the average. If it's below the average, it drives it down. If it's above the average, it drives it up. So this is our costs. So if we were productively efficient, then a business will be producing at this point here where they meet, so that quantity here, and selling it at this price per unit. It'll carry going up here. That'll be the price per unit and at that quantity. Now, when we're looking at businesses, however, the assumption at all times is that they are profit maximizing. So we're looking at traditional theory of firm. Now, if they're profit maximizing, the rule says that's the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this point here. So that's the quantity they're going to produce. We call it Q1, profit maximizing point. Why is it profit maximizing? Because that's the point where they have the biggest difference between total revenue and total costs. And we can also see that's true here. So if we keep going up, we meet with the demand curve, and that will be the price, the market price, when they are producing that quantity. And the cost will be here. That's the average cost per unit when they're making that quantity. So that'll be the cost per unit here. Or also they consider the average cost. So the difference between the cost per unit and the price they're selling it at, all that will be profit. So all that will be profit. And technically that point is the profit maximizing point. It's the biggest difference between the total cost and total revenue. And that is what monopolies will do. On the other hand, that means they're not productively efficient, because productively efficient will be this point down here. It'll be the lowest point of the average cost curve, that quantity, call it Q2. That'll be being productively efficient. And I'm afraid they're not productively efficient. Will they make a profit? In this particular diagram, they would, because there's still a difference there. So they'll still make a profit. However, because it's not the profit maximizing point, it's not the biggest difference between the price and the average cost. There is some difference here, but it's not as much. But this is more the lowest cost at which they can produce. So that's that point there, that quantity 2, that will be the productively efficient. This is the profit maximizing point. And the other efficiency is allocatively efficient, meaning that producing the goods that are demanded by the consumer. So, and that will be this point over here. This point there, this quantity 3. At this point, they're making units without incurring losses. They can make an extra unit without incurring losses. So almost breaking even at that point. And that will be the allocative efficient point, making units that are demanded by the consumers. But they're not doing that, neither they're being productively efficient, instead they're being profit maximizing. So they're doing at Q1 where they find the biggest difference between the costs and the revenue made. And that's a diagram to show, I guess, the power of a monopoly and what they do in the market, if we assume that the objective is profit maximizing and traditional theory of firm. Now, a question that I get asked is, why is the marginal revenue below the demand curve? I'll try and explain it. How much time? Maybe put some numbers on it. Quantity, price, demand curve. So let's put prices. So £10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. At £10, we sell 1 unit. When we reduce the price to £9, we sell 2 units, each at £9. With 8, we sell 3 units. With £7 each, we sell 4 units. With £6 each, we sell 5 units. Okay, so basically the demand curve just shows us the price per unit. Hence, that's why it's also known as the average revenue, price per unit. So what about the marginal revenue? That's the revenue every time we sell an extra item. So let's find out. So when we sell 1 unit, that's £10. So that's total revenue. 1 times 10 is 10. Now when it's 2 times 9 is 18. So the difference between the total revenue when it's 1 and total revenue when it's 2 is 10 and then 18. So the difference is of 8. So the extra revenue is £8 when we sell 2 units at £8. What about when we sell 3 units at £8? That's 24. So the difference between 24 and 18, that'll be 6. So that'll be the marginal revenue, 6 extra pounds. And then we have, let's say when it's 4, so that's 28. So the difference will be 4. So we don't really have, I guess this will be the number 4 there. So you can see that the marginal revenue has that, is that line. So it's always, it always diverges from the average revenue. And so hence, that's why we have those 2 lines divergent. And that will give you a bit more of a clear picture on why those 2 lines diverge there. Good. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is a monopsony. So monopsony is when there's a single buyer, not a single seller, but a single buyer. Is the extreme of purchasing power, single buyer in the market. And what they do is, where can I have? Let's take that. Okay, before I run out of time. Jeez, running out of time soon. So demand, supply, price, and quantity, your equilibrium. I hope it doesn't cut. Right. So with this monopsony, there's only one supplier. So instead of supplying what equilibrium is, they can decide to supply down here. Basically supply a lower quantity, and so hence again they're able to charge a higher price, P1, instead of the equilibrium price. And that is a monopsony, and that's a monopsony power. Good. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I'm running out of time. Revise, get an A, and let me know about it.